There and Back Again by Mason Muirha. It all started with a last-minute decision. On the last week of sign-up, I got a seat in my good friend Mark's Honda CR-V and got ready for a massive undertaking, driving across the country from Madison, Wisconsin to the Pacific coast in Washington to hike the towering cliffs and misty beaches along the ocean. The trip through Hoofers would span 3 days of driving, 2,124 miles across 6 states, then 5 days of backpacking and camping in conditions neither I nor many in our crew had experienced. And when that was finished, I would spend another 3 days driving 750 miles back to Whitefish, Montana, where I would part ways with Mark and hop on a train for another 32 hours back to Milwaukee, sleeping wherever we could, showering never, seeing everything. True dirtbaggery. I spent finals week meticulously packing. All my gear was neatly laid out in a grid on the floor of my apartment. Waterproofing was key. If there's one thing the Pacific Northwest is famous for, it's rain. The Olympic Peninsula, where we were headed, gets over 100 inches per year. I needed waterproofing sacks for my clothes, camera gear, and I needed rain covers for basically everything. After I was all packed, all I had to do left was count down the hours. 1. I was the first at Memorial Union on Thursday morning, and slept on the floor until the others arrived. Mark picked up Jen and Evan and met us there. Mark was already a friend of mine, having backpacked together in Utah with him in the spring before. But Jen and Evan, both freshmen, were strangers. We left pretty early, probably 8:30. I slept all the way until we got to Minnesota. The western half of Minnesota, if you've never been, is flat. Very flat. Our best entertainment was conversation, and a lot of it. By the time we passed through the farmlands and scattered lakes, the four of us had already become friends. I took the wheel and drove us into North Dakota, checking it off my list of states I had yet to visit. It was still darn flat, but you could see for miles unobstructed, and the hills started to grow larger and formed small plateaus and bowls in between them, filled with water that shone a liquid gold in the afternoon sun. I had a great time driving and chatting. I didn't even notice the time flying by, only the impressive landscapes and positivity. In the evening, we pulled off the road to watch the sunset that was forming above the farms in rural North Dakota. We found a dirt road off the highway and parked on a hill, looking back westward at the sun, shining through the dust clouds we kicked up, and reflecting tangerine and magenta onto the rain clouds moving our direction. We listened to hundreds of red-winged blackbirds at the bottom of the hill socializing amongst the cattails. After a long day of driving, slowing down so we could soak in our surroundings and really see where we were was all the more rewarding. Our final destination for the night, Teddy Roosevelt National Park, was shrouded in darkness when we arrived. The land rose up around us like shadows, silhouetted by the moon, leaving us with just our high beams, showing us the way down the winding roads. We found a campsite in a valley full of cottonwoods, and quickly set up the tent. We got in our sleeping bags without looking around, chatted for a while, and fell asleep, exhausted from the long day. Day 2. Mark and I were the first up in the morning. The sun had begun to rise, and the sky was lighting up once again with reds and pinks. I wanted to explore and see what was hidden from us by the darkness during our drive in. I walked across the road and noticed a field surrounded by the looming tan and green hills that appeared pitch black the night before. I found the center of the tall grass and noticed thick steam rising around the perimeter, stretching all the way down along the hillside towards a dip in the landscape at the opposite end, nearly a mile away where the sun would soon peek out. I grabbed Mark, Jen, and Evan from our site, and we stood in the field, watching the sunrise through the mist, illuminating the grass and surrounding cottonwoods. Mark was curious where the steam was coming from, so he walked towards the source near the hills. There he stumbled upon a wide river, hidden by the tall grass, emitting the bright red mist like wildfire into the brisk morning air. We stood for a long time watching. That morning, we drove out of Teddy Roosevelt National Park and got a good look at the scenery. We stopped so I could creep a little too close to a buffalo and take his picture, and stopped again when we saw a huge field full of prairie dogs, sitting and barking on top of the little mounds of dirt that they create when they make their underground tunnels. For the rest of the day, we drove through Montana. All day. Just Montana. State is fucking massive. We stopped at a rest stop on a cliff above the Yellowstone River. The car thermometer read 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and we sat under a wood shelter to get away from the alpine sun. A bald eagle flew by while we looked down at the farms and forests expanding on the horizon. Our long drive ended in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Another 2 states off the list, all in a day's work. We found that there weren't many restaurants that catered to people like us. We found a cheap burger joint and ate on a cliff above the lake. Our bedroom for the night, the Coeur d'Alene National Forest, was closed when we arrived around dusk. I guess we beat the start of the season. We had to settle for a sketchy side road, off down a hill along another nearby lake. Once we were in our tents and night had fallen, a couple cars came curiously creeping toward us, causing some unease. Sleep that night was interesting. Day 3. In the morning, we left the forest at first light and made it into Spokane, Washington, another state down. We had some legendary old-fashioned donuts and hit the road, going through eastern Washington, a sea of multicolored farm hills and wildflower groves, speckled with as many cattle as Montana and North Dakota. When we started getting into the central and western parts of the state, the lower Cascade Mountains began rising up alongside the road, higher and higher, until you had to look out of the sunroof to see their summits. It was a gorgeous scene, one that even I, as the driver, couldn't help but steal glances at. My eyes darted from the road to the mountains and back to the road, into the lakes and the waterfalls coming down the roadside cliffs. It was so beautiful, I didn't notice the low fuel light turn on the dashboard. We had a collective oh shit moment when we noticed. There was an estimated range of about 11 miles left in the tank. We scrambled onto Google Maps to find the nearest station, 8 miles away, in Snoqualmie Pass. We can make it, we thought. I coasted as often as possible and offered some encouraging words to the Honda. We exited the highway with 9 miles left in the tank. We got onto the frontage road and started up the hill. 5 miles left. We got our first peek at the town as it appeared over the hill. 3 miles left. And then boom, we rolled into the gas station with 2 miles left in the tank. Our lucky day. And my bad. We were starving, and Evan noticed the station was selling homemade tamales. We scarfed down 2 each while we sat on the curbside. Mark mentioned that the Pacific Crest Trail came through town. We were ahead of schedule, so we decided to pay it a visit. The trail was up towards the foot of a massive cliff and covered in several feet of snow. We hiked up a steep incline and reached a beautiful waterfall, looking out at an adjacent peak. A man even skied down the trail past us. Popular place. After getting a little turned around on the way down, we made it back to the car and set out for Seattle. Still ahead of schedule, we reached the outlying suburbs and then downtown. We decided to pay a visit to Pike Place Market, the famous public market where we chowed down on some quality local grub. At the market, I grabbed some dried pineapples for the trail. Jen and Evan got some dried veggies, and Mark got some sushi. If you ever need some comfort food on trail for when the shit gets rough, take it from me, dried pineapple will get you through. Next, we got the groceries for the trip. A whole cart stuffed to the brim. It took hours. Almost all of us came down with the grocery store equivalent of cabin fever by the time it was over. Then came the greatest treat of all. We rendezvoused with the flight crew, the other 7 that had flown out to meet us, at Steve and Val's house in Renton, parents of Annie's roommate in Madison. The other trip leaders, Ryan, Annie, and Shayna, and the 4 other participants, Claire, Shay, Jess, and Sarah, were already there, chowing down on a full meal that Steve and Val had prepared. We were exhausted and drove straight into the pasta, garlic bed, and salad spread out on the kitchen counter. Never in my life have I had pasta that tasted that good. We spent the rest of the night going over gear, planning for the next day, and then some of us stayed up chatting, telling the other 7 all about our cross-country journey and getting to know each other. Sleeping under a roof was almost too luxurious. I didn't understand how our smell was bearable, but offer me a shag carpet to sleep on and I'll take it 10 times out of 10. Day 4. The next morning, we set our sights on Port Angeles on the northern shore of the Olympic Peninsula. There, we visited a ranger station, got our bear cans, had a quick lunch of cucumbers and spinach on pita bread with hummus, amazing creation, shout out to Ryan for that one, and went over the route. We would go north along the Pacific Ocean, traversing the beaches and kelp-covered rock gardens, up into the rainforest and along driftwood as big as we were tall, until we arrived at our final location, Shai Beach, 14 miles away. We hit the final stretch of road, past Lake Crescent, and down to the Ozette Lake Campground, the trailhead for our hike. We set up camp, shuttled the cars, and took a walk into the woods. That walk was our first taste of the humbling scale of the Northwest Woods. At dark, we stopped at a bridge, crossing a river coming from the lake. I took out my flashlight and looked down at the water and saw bats, at least 40 or 50, darting in every direction above the water's surface, catching insects. We watched them buzz about, fluttering right in front of our faces, until we looked up and saw the stars above us. At camp, we sat silently at a picnic table before bed, looking at the stars and listening to the sounds of the strange place we were in. Frogs croaked in the swamp across the road, filled up by rain unlike anything in the Midwest. Dark green pines towered higher than some buildings in Madison, as far as the eye could see. Black mud stretched through mossy jungles down to the saltwater sea. What an alien place it was. Day 5. Rain started to fall overnight, continuing into the morning. When we awoke, we found our campsite was drenched. But we were prepared. I was almost excited. It wouldn't be a trip to Washington if it didn't downpour. I would feel robbed. We packed up and got into our rain gear. Finally time for the real adventure, or rather, the planned one, to start. We had a 3.5-mile stretch of inland trail to cover that day. The 11 of us walked under the massive evergreens of the coastline's interior, past ferns as tall as we were, and stumps that put some cars to shame. The trail ended at the ocean shore. We had made it, 2,124 miles and some change. The smell of salt water filled the air, mixing with the pines and the rain that was falling endlessly, creating a sound like little kettle drums as it struck the leaves. A grove of tall trees nearby made a perfect campsite. We set up tarps, tents, and got settled in. Ryan, being Ryan, recruited Jen, Claire, and I for a nature walk along the shore under our umbrellas. I had seen some neat birds on the walk to camp, so I came along to get a picture. The walk started all right, but soon we were using our umbrellas less as a roof and more as a shield, like we were charging into battle against the wind. I made the mistake of turning away from the wind with my umbrella open, and it broke right in half, so I went back to camp. I sat in the tent to dry off a bit, but I felt like I was wasting the scenery by chickening out and retreating into cover. I got my butt pad and set up a couch of packs underneath one of the tarps and watched some others play cards. I was so comfortable, warm, and dry, sitting outside under that tarp that I was giggling. Take that, nature. I'm cozy. We ate dinner together and then fell asleep. The next day was the biggest day we would face. Day 6. We woke up early and to a strange sight. The tides were pulling out, away past the kelp beds and dark gray rocks, away into the ocean, reflecting the pale blue sky back at us. Wait, blue? We looked up and saw patches of clear blue sky peeking through the clouds. The rain would be leaving soon. What luck. We sang Jimmy Cliff while we packed up camp. When we rounded the point down the beach, the shore changed from loose pebbles into silky, smooth, dark sand. The tide left a glassy layer of water coating the whole beach as it left, and we could see our reflections right at our feet as we walked. The first obstacle of the day was the Ozette River. There's no bridge, so the only way across it is right through it. When we reached the southern bank, the sun finally came out, and the sky was almost cloudless, so we stopped to catch some rays and dry out our clothes before we had to submerge our already sopping wet feet. The first spot we tested was too deep. Annie, shorter than Ryan and I, who guinea pigged the first ford spot with her, was getting water almost up to the stomach. Time to rethink. We looked downstream and found a shallow but much wider section and decided it was good enough. It took a good 5 to 10 minutes to get across, slowly and carefully, but none of us went for a swim. We powwowed on the other bank and ate some snacks, but the day was getting late and high tide would be back soon, so we got up and headed down towards the headland that we needed to cross before we would be forced up inland, up the cliffs. But we arrived too late. The water started to creep back up the rocks, making the outcrop too dangerous to cross. The only way to get around was up into the trees. While the others began to spot a route up the cliff, I became busy photographing a bald eagle that had flown right over my head and landed at a nearby tree. When I rejoined the group, Mark was spotting the route, and we slowly followed him up the slick, muddy incline. It took probably 20 to 30 minutes to get up, but it didn't stop there. We needed to find the overland trail, which at the time we actually believed existed. We spent the next 5 hours pushing down thick bushes and small trees, stepping over giant logs on the forest floor, falling up to our waists into holes made by the decaying trees that were piled up many feet thick. The forest floor was more of a loose sponge bed, really. It was hard work, and there was no sign of the trail. By the time the sun began to set, we were out of water, and we knew we couldn't keep going. After a short discussion, we turned around to find a creek we had passed, either minutes or several years ago. We weren't really sure. Luckily, it was only a short walk. We set up tents on some very not flat, but also beautiful tree sponge. We ate our dinner in unusually happy spirits, given the draining activity. I was in a hole most of the night, with a root right in my back, but I had some of the best sleep of the trip that night. On a day like that, it's the little pleasures, like a warm sleeping bag, that outweigh the bad. Day 7. The next morning, we tore down our makeshift campsite, slipped our feet back into wet socks and wet boots, and devised a plan to escape the forest moon of Endor. We would follow the creek as far as we could, hoping it wouldn't turn into a waterfall. Getting down into the creek was the first challenge because of the thick bushes along it. The foliage was dense and overgrown, forming a wall that stretched all down the creek. We spent the first 45 minutes struggling to make space to even walk. Slowly moving down the creek, we looked up and saw that we had been losing elevation. We were going down towards the beach. The stream became wider, and the green retreated away from our sides. It was going to work, provided it didn't end in a long fall, of course. After maybe an hour or so, I was the first to find a hole in the dense scrub where the stream hit the beach. No waterfall. I finally popped out into the open, salty air. One by one, we emerged and saw the beach, reborn as absolute badasses. Nearly 24 hours in the bush is a lot, and we totally owned it. We sat and enjoyed the lack of thorns, looking at the small bay and sea stacks in front of us. There were some small black balls bobbing on the waves. All of a sudden, a bunch of black eyes snapped right onto us. We sat and had a staring contest with 20 to 30 curious harbor seals before we headed out. The next challenge of the day was the impassable headlands. No safe shoreline passage existed, so we were left with the ropes attached to trees, rope after rope after rope, to pull ourselves up and over the cliffs hundreds of feet tall, and then rope after rope to climb back down. 3 or 4 headlands later, we found ourselves at our destination, Shai Beach, stretching miles and miles into the distance, the farthest point lost in the fog. We found a nice campsite up the beach, past the stacks of huge driftwood logs. In between laughing fits, we ate lunch, and a few of us took a walk where we saw a sea otter doing a relaxed backstroke between some rocks at high tide. The logs by camp made for some great benches, so we all sat and had some sweet, sweet hot drinks and talked the day away. When night came, we lit a fire on the beach and talked until some strange shrimp-like hopping sand critters swarmed our circle. I still don't know what they are today. I can't handle bugs, so these things were really just plain weird. We weren't having it, so we went to bed, feeling satisfied. It was a great day. Day 8. It was time to leave the next day. Camp came up off the ground into our packs, and with it the memory of the coast and the crazy hikes we had to get there. When we reached the end of the beach, we climbed one last set of ropes up off the sand and headed back through the forest to find the car, parked down the road to the trailhead. Mark and Ryan set off to bring them back the minivan, thanks to them both for running the shuttles, while the rest of us sat on an old wooden platform on the side of the road and bummed it up. We finished the remaining food we packed in and made some more hot drinks and then took a nap. We awoke to the car horns and piled into the cars. At our first stop in Nia Bay, we got some dollar ice cream cones and ate it in the parking lot. We paid a visit to Cape Flattery, the westernmost point of the lower 48, then set out for the Hoh Rainforest, our last campsite of the trip. The forest was in the interior of Olympic National Park and is famous for its towering trees carpeted in moss. The campsite we chose for the night was close to a river, so we ended up relaxing on the shore for a while, looking at the mountains poking out of the rainforest. After our feast of ramen bombs, we had a fire and talked some more, then ventured back to the river to look at the incredible stars that stuck out from behind the cloud cover. Then it was off to bed again. Day 9. The morning came too soon and I woke up groggy. We had a quick breakfast and then decided to take a short hike nearby through the Hall of Mosses, a trail through some thick jungle with trees that looked like something out of a fairy tale. We even saw an elk sitting a short distance from the trail. We also saw the park ranger who walked by us with a paintball gun, on his way to shoot the elk right in the butt so it would stop coming close to visitors. The rest of the day we spent in Seattle, back at Pike Place Market, waiting to head back to Steve and Val's to de-gear and debrief. It was a long, busy day of driving, so when we finally got back into Renton, it was a huge sigh of relief. It was nice to sit in a living room and talk about what we liked from the trip, what went wrong, and why it was still so much fun. It brought everyone a lot closer and made the next morning that much harder. Day 10. When morning came, it was time to part ways. Steve and Val again treated us like their own, with cinnamon rolls, fruit, and coffee in the morning. After all the gear was packed up and we took one last group photo, we said our goodbyes in the driveway. I can't imagine a better group of people that I would want to spend all that time with. I was also surprisingly sad, as a dog person, to say goodbye to their 4 cats, Fuzzer, Zippy, Peekaboo, and Sam, that gave us so much love while we invaded their home. The flying crew packed into the van and headed back to the airport. Mark and I grabbed Jen and Evan and loaded up the CRV. We dropped off Jen first at a friend's place downtown, said goodbye, and paid one last visit to Pike Place Market for breakfast. Evan was the next to go, and Mark and I were both sad to see the last of our great crew leave. We left him at a friend's in a neighborhood above Lake Washington. Now it was just the two of us, or at least until we stopped in North Bend to pick up a very eccentric co-worker of Mark's, to whom he had offered a ride out to Kalispell, Montana, where they were working for the summer. I slept in the passenger seat first, and then took the wheel when we got into Iberville. We stopped briefly at Flathead Lake, a beautiful blue basin surrounded by snow-capped peaks in the distance. Then it was off to Whitefish, north of Kalispell, to check out the train station from where I would be departing in the morning. We got familiar with the town and then found a campsite just west of the entrance to Glacier National Park for the night. Our passenger had Mark set up her tent, and Mark and I turned the COV into the dirtbag mobile. We stretched out on the flattened driver and passenger seats and passed out. Day 11. We got into Whitefish about a half hour before the train arrived. Mark and I sat and talked for a bit about the summer and his job working for the Montana Conservation Corps and the uncertainty of living in a new state without friends or family close by. When the train arrived, and it was time to say goodbye to the last member of my crew and a good friend, I'd be lying if I said I didn't fight back tears. Best of luck to you in Montana this summer, Mark, and watch out for bears. I got to my seat, threw my pack in the overhead bin, and let the train take me away. We went straight through Glacier first thing in the morning. I watched the scenery pass by as I reflected on the trip and everything that I had learned, writing it all down so I wouldn't lose a single detail at the time. The train left Montana and got a little ways into North Dakota by sundown. I fell asleep in the surprisingly comfortable Amtrak seats. But then again, little things like a reclining chair and a ceiling don't feel so trivial after what we had done. Day 12. I woke up to a view of the Mississippi River peeking through the trees as we raced back towards Minneapolis. We left the river behind and reached Milwaukee in the late afternoon. I got off at the station in downtown looking like I hadn't had a shower in 2 weeks, because I hadn't.
So for our second speaker today, we have Emma Hudson. And Emma, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? So your relation to Hoofers, the major from Madison you graduated with, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I joined Hoofers in 2016. I was at UW-Madison majoring in anthropology and environmental studies, and I led backpacking and canoe trips with Hoofers. I also went to a couple of Delta lodges, super fun. But I graduated in 2018.
Yeah, and we're obviously talking to you because you did hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So could you tell us a little more about like what went into going into that, and then also just a little synopsis about it as well?
Yeah, so I had a few friends that had done the trail, and I was really curious about it. And I started doing some research and watching some videos, and then I realized at some point oh, you don't just think this is cool, you're actually planning to do it. So at that point, it just became something that I had to do. So I started in spring of 2019 at the Mexican border. Long story short, I hiked the trail in several different directions, northbound and southbound, but eventually I did the whole thing, finished in Canada. So the trail is 2,653 miles long. It follows the Crest Mountains through California, Washington, and Oregon. So you go through a lot of different environments. You meet a lot of really cool people out there. Just a really neat experience.
It's awesome. Okay, do you have a favorite memory and hardest part about the trail that you could share?
Yeah, so favorite memory, I think has got to be in the High Sierras. I was with a big group of my friends, and it's just so beautiful, and you spend the whole morning going up these crazy steep passes that are covered in snow, and then you come down and you you're hanging out at all these alpine lakes and rivers and going cliff jumping, and just we took it really slow through that area just because we were really excited to be there, and it's just so beautiful and amazing. Hardest thing I think for me was the mental game towards the end in Washington. I had split from my friends that I'd been with for a long time because of we were going at different speeds. And so I was not with them anymore, and it was raining all the time and super cold. And everyone's a beast in Washington. You can do crazy amounts of mileage and go up super steep things really fast, and you're it's insane, but your body's also falling apart. Yeah. So I was in my knee was in a lot of pain, my feet were in a lot of pain. It was not pretty, and it was cold and rainy, and just the mental fortitude of going out of town every time and keeping going and doing all your miles that I had to do was really rough. Mm-hmm. But it got it done, and I got to Canada, so that was cool.
Yeah, awesome. And then, do you have any words of advice for people looking to do the trail?
Yeah, for sure. I think just like, first of all, like go backpacking. Like make sure you like it. Get some experience with it. You know, you see people going out to do a through hike and they've like never been backpacking before, which like, you know, it's harder for them at the beginning. They don't really know what they're doing, and like they don't even necessarily know that they like it. You know, backpacking is like boring and painful most of the time, and amazing like part of the time. So yeah, just have some experience, get more experience where you can. Do your research, but ultimately at the end of the day, like you just have to go out and do it. Like the hardest thing is like getting yourself to that point where you're like, yes, I'm doing this. Like you just have to pull the trigger and do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on our little podcast here and share some of your experiences. We're so happy to have you as some Hoofer alumni.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
The final part of our podcast today is the tent talk. This episode is all about backpacking. We just heard from somebody who completed the whole Pacific Crest Trail recently, but what about the first woman to ever do so? That'd be Teddy Boston. In 1976, at 49 years old, she set out to be the first woman to complete the whole trail, Canada to Mexico. And just for some reference, the trail wasn't fully completed until 1993. She had a whole host of challenges on the trail, two of which being that she was older than the average person who attempted it, but also, mainly, she was a woman. At that time, that was pretty rare. The first man to hike the whole Pacific Crest Trail, he got a flood of media attention and book deals. Teddy Boston lost her job. And some people just thought, well, maybe a woman can't hike that far. Teddy Boston hiked all 2,650 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail in 5 months and 15 days. That was an incredible achievement for her and a huge step of progress towards equality in the outdoors. But I want to stop here for a second. Teddy Boston has a quote in the Campbell Trail Register that reads, quote, "I met nothing but fantastic people at the full length of the trail. And if I, a woman alone, can do the trail, then anyone can do it. Prepare properly, have the right equipment, the right attitude, and everything will work out." These are the words and story of an affluent white woman on the trail. Her story is incredible and inspiring, but it does not speak for all women. So today, I want to take some time to talk about women backpackers whose stories aren't heard enough, and there are endless stories in this category. But for now, let's start with Sophia Dannenberg. I'm going to read this article pretty much verbatim, and by the way, all of these articles that I'm pulling from can be found in the description of this video. Born outside Chicago in 1972 to a black father and Japanese mother, Sophia Dannenberg went on to earn degrees in environmental science and public policy from Harvard. In 1999, a childhood friend encouraged her to try rock climbing. For 2 years, Dannenberg pursued technical climbs, but soon she became obsessed with mountaineering. By 2005, she had already scaled Mounts Rainier, Kilimanjaro, and McKinley. In the spring of 2006, she decided to tackle the world's tallest, Everest. At 7 a.m. on May 19th, Dannenberg, aged 34, summited, becoming the first African American and the first black woman from anywhere to cross the top of the world. At the time, she was suffering from bronchitis, frostbite, and an oxygen mask clogged with snow and ice. There aren't a lot of African Americans or black people from anywhere in high-altitude mountaineering, she told the Chicago Reader in 2006, adding that she'd never met a fellow black person on any big mountain. Earlier this year, Dannenberg, who now lives in Seattle and works on global chemical and environmental regulations for Boeing, told Melanin Base Camp, a site for climbers of color, that she's found that people in South American, African, and Asian countries are noticeably happy to see another brown person trekking and climbing. "They don't make the normal assumptions of being a rich white man," she said. "People have offered me additional information and showed me immense hospitality. Climbing in Kenya and Tanzania was like a celebration. They were so happy to see people that looked like them." So here's a photo of Dannenberg on top of Everest, and here she is as an international policy leader at Boeing. Absolute legend. Let's turn to our third and final icon for today and refocus on through hiking. Rahiwa Heil, pictured here, hiked all 2,190 miles of the Appalachian Trail in 2016. I'm also going to read an article about her verbatim from Sierra. You may recall reading about this Eritrean American woman's pioneering 2016 completion of the AT, Appalachian Trail, and Sierra's recent story about notable thru-hikers of Instagram. Rahiwa Heil not only became one of a small handful of African American women to successfully complete the trek, but the 30-something also wrote candidly about her experiences and outside, and along the way left books by black authors and trail shelters. These were writers who had endured more than I'd ever been asked to, whose strength gave me strength in turn, Hale wrote in BuzzFeed in 2017. I wanted to show them beauty from heights that a history of terror had made clear were never intended to be theirs. Since completing her Thru-Hike, Hale has given a number of interviews and presentations about her personal experience on the AT, inspiring hikers of color, queer hikers, and women throughout the world. And earlier this month, she scored a major book deal about her experience. Keep an eye out for In Open Country, forthcoming from Harper, in which Hale will explore what it means to move through America and the world as a Black woman. One of her articles that I read for this podcast, Going It Alone, that's actually where this picture is from, has some incredible anecdotes. If you'd like to read the full story, again, it's in the description of this video. One of these anecdotes really struck a chord with me and I wanted to share it. Quote, as I'm moving along, a day hiker heads in the opposite direction and stops me for a chat. He's affable and inquisitive. He asks what many have asked before. Where are you from? I tell him Miami. He laughs and says, no, but really, where are you from? He mentions something about my features, my thin nose, and then trails off. I tell him my family's from Eritrea, a country in the Horn of Africa next to Ethiopia. He looks relieved. I knew it, he says. You're not Black. I say that, of course I am. None more Black, I weakly joke. Not really, he says. You're African, not Black. I'm tired of this man. His froms and blacks. He wishes me good luck and leaves. He means it, too. He isn't malicious. To him, there's nothing abnormal about our conversation. He's categorized me, and the world makes sense again. Not Black. I hike the remaining miles back to my tent and don't emerge for hours. So that was a really powerful example of how that man seemed to not understand how damaging his words could be. Moving to the fall semester, we want to make sure we're creating an environment that allows space for voices that have been historically oppressed or silenced, and that also that environment is welcoming to anyone who has an interest in the outdoors. After all, this love for the outdoors is what brings us all together to Hoofers at UW-Madison. So thank you for your engagement, reflection, and active listening during this episode. We have a long ways to go, but the only way to get there is together. Have a great last week of summer. We can't wait to see you on campus soon.